Present.
The chair will now ask the secretary to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The chair invites any members of the audience who wish to participate to do so, and asks that those who do not wish to participate please remain silent during the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We acknowledge that Milwaukee lies on traditional Menominee, Potawatomi, and Ho-Chunk homeland along the southwest shores of Lake Michigan, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes. On this site, the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnick rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's Menominee, Ojibwa, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and Mohegan sovereign nations remain present to this day. This meeting is being conducted in person from the Central Services Building in order to allow as much public access and participation as possible. This meeting is also being broadcast on WYMS Radio 88.9 FM and via live stream on the MPS website and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. Before we begin tonight's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding the interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of our audience.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la Junta Escolar de las Escuelas Públicas de Milwaukee. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor llame al 312-626-6799. Nuevamente, 312-626-6799. E introduzca el número de reunión 608-130-5362. Nuevamente, el número de reunión es 608-130-5362. Gracias.
Thank you. Before we move to our agenda, the chair will ask that we share in a moment of silence to commemorate the passing of the following members of the MPS community. Tona Lisa Howes, a school secretary from Vincent High School. Jeffrey Hogan, a substitute teacher. Annie Henry, a retired educational assistant from Starm School. Mildred Hoffman, a retired curriculum specialist. Jeffrey Hogan, a retired teacher from Hamilton High School. Donald Moser, a retired teacher from Pulaski High School. Julie Nichols, a retired teacher from Grant School. Carol Schwager, a retired school secretary from Burdick School. And Terrian Hassel, a student from Vincent High School. If we could have a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Each month, the Milwaukee Board of School Directors accept the public's input, both at the committee's meetings and through correspondence submitted to the Office of Board Governance. As this is the regular monthly meeting of the board, however, in accordance with board rules, the board may take testimony only on those items noticed for public comment. Public comment will not be taken on any other items on tonight's agenda. Just as a reminder, Robert's Rules of Order dictate that all comments, questions, or requests should be directed to the chair, who will determine the most efficient way to address them. Please be respectful of the democratic process adhered to by the board. For the safety of all and to ensure the good order of the meeting, harassment or intimidation tactics of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone persisting in disrupting this process will be asked to leave or will be escorted from the meeting and not allowed to return. Anyone ejected from the meeting may continue to listen to the meeting or access the agenda items online. Also, no one other than members of the board, designated staff, and those who have been invited to present or participate in items of business will be allowed on stage before, during, or after meetings of the board and its committees. Finally, for our listening audience, if you wish to access the evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting the meetings, agendas, and minutes page on the MPS website and choosing online agendas. Now let's begin. Madam Secretary, what is the first item of business?
The first item is action on the minutes of the January 2024 special and regular meetings of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors.
If there are no corrections, the minutes from the January 2024 meeting are approved by consensus. Madam Secretary, are there any reports or communications from the superintendent?
Madam President, we have two communications from the superintendent. The first is the monthly report with possible action of the superintendent of schools. This is an informational item, and although it was noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Will the superintendent please present the report?
Madam Chair and members of the board, Keith Posley, Superintendent of Schools. February's report outlines some of the district's highlights for this month. February began with an observance of Black History Month, celebrating the lives and contributions of Black Americans. Combined with the Black Lives Matter Week of Action and school campaign, the MPS community has been immersed in the spirit of Black History Month with students and educators, activities involved in planning and participating in diverse activities and projects. The commitment in honoring Black narratives has been evident through the myriad of activities, including student performance, community conversations, inspirational speakers, speeches, poetry, class lessons, school programs, and a host of other culturally relevant experiences that have and will continue to contribute to our community. This year, Milwaukee Public Schools celebrated 50 years of Montessori education with a community fair hosted at McDowell Montessori on February 10th. The fair was supported by 1,700 students, community members, officials, and staff. It was a wonderful experience. Everyday school counselors impact the lives of students and help children find success in schools. This month, we celebrate National Counselors Week, held from February 5th through February 9th. School counselors are an integral part of the education program, ensuring students are on target and have the courses they need to earn their high school diploma. Thank you to all of our school counselors. February 23rd kicked off the We Are the Drum performances, showcasing the performances of talented singers, dancers, actors, and choreographers that included students of all ages from a number of MPS schools. I'm excited to see this year's showcase and encourage you to do the same. A performance run through March 3rd. Our youth intern and apprentice programs are growing. This year, we have 55 more students participated than last year. This is worth celebrating as it is a testament of the hard work of our students for their commitment and staff for connecting and working with partners to find internships and apprenticeships for our students. Some of the vocational areas students were placed in include health sciences, finance, information technology and law, public safety, corrections, security, education, and manufacturing. Internships and apprenticeships are not the only area increasing in numbers. This year's kindergarten enrollment fair had an increase in attendees by 260%, going from 410 to 1,474 attendees, and an increase of a on-site enrollment of 64%, going from 340 to 559. And this is, and as of today, we have an enrollment of 1,471 kindergartners for the 24-25 school year. This concludes my report this evening, and I have a copy attached, and I'll sit ready for any questions that you may have in regard to my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the board wish to make any comments? Okay, Madam Secretary, what is the next communication?
The next communication from the Superintendent of Schools is an update with possible action on the implementation of school resource officers, SROs, as a result of Act 12. This is an informational item. Although it was noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Will the superintendent please present the update?
Madam Chair and members of the board, Keith Posley, Superintendent of Schools. This evening, I'm sharing an update with you on the steps we have taken towards developing a plan to respond to Act 12. The administration has been in discussion with various stakeholders to include special meetings with the Superintendent Student Advisory Council on November 9th of 2023, another meeting with the Superintendent Student Advisory Council on November 16th of 2023. We met with the Restorative Practice Students Group at Audubon High School on January 3rd of 2024. And we met with the Parent District Advisory Council on January 4th of 2024. We also met with Leaders at Night in Transformation on January 18th of 2024, and the NAACP on February 13th of 2024. And we have an upcoming meeting with Yes and Voces de la Frontera on March 7th of 2024. In addition to these meetings, we have met and had discussions, and we have in communications with the MTEA, Milwaukee Teacher Education Association, ASC, district staff, community members, and the Milwaukee Police Department, along with the mayor's office. To devise the best comprehensive plan possible, we set groups of various locations to get a well-rounded view of what other districts are successfully doing. The districts visited were Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Georgia, Fulton County, Georgia, and Bibb County, Georgia. During these visits, various representatives observed schools, resource officers, programs, and security structures that implement a variety of practices focused on improving relationships between students, law enforcement, youth, and the greater community. Representatives from Milwaukee included Police Chief Norman, Deputy Police Chief Johnson, Board Director Leonard, Board Director Jackson, ASC President Steve Lubar, Regional Superintendent Miguel Sanchez, MPS Technology Director Chad Myers, MPS Facilities and Maintenance Director Sean Kane, and the Chief of School Administration, Dr. Catrice Cotton, along with myself. Our goals for the beginning, from the beginning, has been to develop a plan in partnership with the Milwaukee Police Department that redefines the provision of the previous roles of the school resource officers in MPS. In doing so, my team has met regularly to look at options that encompass best practice combined with stakeholder feedback. As we continue to work diligently to understand the requirements and obligations of Act 12, we now have substantial information for our site visits, discussions and collaborations with stakeholders that make us ready to move forward in a collaborative and planning process. In moving forward, we will continue to meet with stakeholders and gather best practice to guide our work. We will need board support in finalizing decisions and implementation of a final plan. As we move forward, our commitment remains steadfast in engaging with stakeholders and integrating best practices to inform our plan. We will rely on the support of the board to navigate final decisions and implementation of the plan. This collaborative consensus will encompass the program design as well as its associated financial commitments. This concludes my report, and I am ready to answer any questions that you may have in regards to this item.
Thank you very much. Do the board wish to make any comments or ask questions? Director Simpson.
Thank you, President Herndon. Just very happy to hear the involvement that the student groups have been playing in creating this plan, and just wondering if there are any overarching concerns or suggestions that you're hearing back from the students.
Administration.
Madam Chair and members of the board, we have had, and Mr. Boswell will probably be one of the ones that could give some of those information. But we have heard from a number of students, and the students, have expressed concern of what, how this would better work in their school community. And we have been working to work through that. They gave us the ideas of around the pros and cons of some of the things that they had that was in the back of their minds that they wanted us to make sure that we take a closer look at. One of the things that just come to mind was the idea of the location of the officers. Are they housed inside of the school and things of that nature? So we have been working through a number of those things, and as we get that information, we've been sharing it back to the larger group. You see assembled on the board floor here with me tonight is the team at the district level that has been working with our young people through that. So, Mr. Boswell, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Posley. Matthew Boswell, Senior Director of the Department of Student Services, President Herndon, members of the board. Yes, in our very intentional receiving of student voices, the big three, as we call it, meaning things that we heard most frequently, was three things that students informed us in reference to what they would like to see. But also, before I would like to do that, I would just like to say I would like to thank all of our students. They are some of the brightest, most involved, and most innovative students I have spoke to, and I'm extremely proud of them. The three things that they provided to us in terms of feedback was, one, appropriate training. That rung very loud. That their expectation is that any SRO officer or program that is brought into the district must have appropriate training. They talked about the intentional aspect of building meaningful relationships with the officers, and they spoke directly to community alignment. Meaning that the officers, in terms of selection, was from their community. And also they spoke about involvement in the selection of those officers. Those was the four things that, as Dr. Posley spoke, was pros, and we did a pros-con approach that rung extremely loud. And also just like to really thank Dr. Posley for being intentional in reference to that.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions by the board? Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I think one of the requirements was that the SROs would go through 40 hours of training prior to working with our students. Do we have that training program selected? Do we have an idea of the cost of that? Is that something that's internally developed or we're working with consultants on?
Administration.
Madam Chair and members of the board, yes, we have that training. The Milwaukee Police Department have identified that training and have been in conversation with us about that training. And there is a price that the Milwaukee Police Department has in their possession.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
Not at this time.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, we'll continue on. Madam Secretary, are there any reports or communications from the board clerk, chief officer, or the Office of Board Governance?
Madam President, there are two communications from the Office of Board Governance. The first communication is consideration of and possible action regarding the upcoming vacancy in the position of Board Clerk, Chief Officer, Office of Board Governance. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session for consideration of this item.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, were we to go into closed session at this time, or
This item could be deferred to the end of the meeting at your call, Madam President.
Yes, we will defer to the completion of the meeting. Madam Secretary, what is the next communication from the Office of Board Governance?
The next communication is a monthly report with possible action on legislative activities affecting MPS. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Does the Office of Board Governance wish to make any comments?
Madam President, members, Mr. Chris Thiel is here to present that report.
Mr. Thiel, go ahead, please.
President Herndon, thank you, members of the board. Chris Thiel, head of the Office of Governmental Relations. This evening, just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One of them being, we are now at the end of the legislative session. The Assembly has had its last floor period and has adjourned. They have passed a number of pieces of legislation, and we anticipate that the state Senate will come in with at least one day of a floor session in March. And we'll see what items they take over to the Senate side from the Assembly. So we're still waiting to see on a couple of pieces of legislation what might move forward. And then, of course, if passed by the Senate, what action the governor will take. And we will update you once everything is finalized and said and done. But that said, this legislature, is at the tail end of this session. And as you have heard and has been much discussed, we will now have new legislative maps in the state of Wisconsin. The elections that take place in November will be based on those maps. And when we arrive at our next legislative session, which will begin January 15th or so of 2025, we will then have a session based on people elected on those new maps. So kind of an end of an era of where we've been moving into that next election period going forward. The other piece of information that I'd like to highlight is for those who were able to attend the Wisconsin Association of School Boards convention in January, you may be familiar with some of the slides that are in the attachment here, and I'll just describe them for those listening. The Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials is another organization in our state comprised of the chief financial officers of the districts around the state. And this organization does a tremendous job collecting information from their respective districts, really putting it into a format that's hopefully a little easier to understand, when sometimes we get into this technical language. But what they have done in this presentation is really tried to make clear that the discussions we're having in Milwaukee and within MPS are happening across the state, and specifically with regard to school districts considering going to referendum. And according to the survey they've done of their members, they're anticipating that 136 of the state's 421 districts will go to an operating referendum as soon as this year, whether it's this spring or by the November elections, to simply make sure that they have enough resources in hand to support their students in their classrooms, their staffs, and do all of the things it takes to make sure schools and school districts are operating in a way that our communities hope that they would be. It's an extraordinary situation because if, in fact, we do see something on the order of 136 operational referendum, that will break the all-time record for the number of districts that will have had to go to referendum to do the basic function of making sure our students in the state are educated. They, too, are having the discussion where they are wondering why, if the state is sitting on a record surplus itself, the state has not stepped in to do the job that the state should be doing under the state constitution of funding our schools. And as I'm sure you've had conversations and as people wonder why school districts are considering going to referendum, just highlighting the fact that we are at the end of this legislative session, the state will not be doing any more work that would bring any more resources to school districts. So it is in the hands of communities now, given the timeline we have, because school districts have to set their budgets this spring in anticipation of next school year, the 24-25 school year. So there is understandably some confusion. Well, if the state has those funds, why won't they just fund schools? And just highlighting this timeline and where we are, and that the decisions are now left in the hands of school districts and school communities. So along with, simply highlighting that fact that that's where we are in the state of Wisconsin, The slides kind of show you our history. As we've discussed, we have not had per pupil funding that's kept pace with inflation for 16 years in the state of Wisconsin. That means students are $3,380 lower in support. They have been defunded that amount over that period of time relative to what used to be our state law. We have discussed, and I'll say again, that our state is near or at the bottom for support for students with disabilities. We are near or at the bottom for support for English learners. And that is putting the significant fiscal pressure on our school districts, and in turn is what is moving school boards like ours across the state to consider going to a referendum. There's additional information in these slides. I think some of the tax information that they provide might be interesting to folks, as it indicates kind of what our recent tax history has been in terms of compared to some of our neighbors, and those numbers going lower relative to some of our neighbors, and that's been part of the discussion. We have dropped as a state from 11th in per pupil funding since 2002 or so to below 25th today. And again, all these indicators are what are driving the discussions at the school board level. Another thing that I would like to point out is when we have some of this conversation on some of the technical items, as we discussed in January, the referendum that this board has approved will not raise property taxes by $252 million. It's going to increase the revenue limit by that amount. And the design of this referendum is very purposeful to actually limit the property tax impact relative to the amount that we're trying to generate to support our students. So the property tax impact is about $216 per 100,000. The first year impact is less than 100 million actually compared to that 252 million figure that's been out there. So there has been some confusion, but just wanted to clarify that it is not the case that property taxes will be going up by that amount. The other thing, this is a technical term used in finance, the mill rate. The tax rate per 1,000 of value is something that's used when you get kind of deep into the weeds of school finance. But that has come up as well in terms of where we are. And our mill rate has actually been going down over the last several years. It has gone down since our last referendum. And as we have increased offerings for students successfully through that referendum, as we said, you go into the schools now and there's music in the hallway and there's art on the walls and there are the things happening that we promised we would implement. That mill rate, that tax rate, as we designed the last referendum, has been coming down, and the similar situation by the design of this referendum will play out. So again, the administration has been very purposeful about recognizing the impact and trying to balance the needs of the community. And our mill rate today in Milwaukee County, of the school districts in Milwaukee County, is right exactly in the middle of the mill rates that we see. And even with the referendum, we don't anticipate that we will have the top number. So some technical information there, but as you may have had some discussions, and as people want to be educated about the implications and clarify some of these details, just thought it'd be important to give you the statewide perspective in the attachment and a little more detail as we go forward. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board? Director Leonard.
So first of all, thank you, Mr. Thiel. I always love to have all that data. It makes it much easier to talk about this. I appreciate all your hard work. I really do. I just have just some comments that I can't be quiet on this issue. I find that there's a couple of ironies that keep coming up to me. So one is that 85% of our voucher schools in the city of Milwaukee alone are completely dependent on tax dollars to stay alive, to remain solvent. So my concern on that one is that we seem to ignore the needs of our public school students, but we have no problem ignoring that irony. The other irony is, I checked some of the research. Foxconn has now reached $3 billion in tax incentives, I believe would be a better way to say that, for the total hiring of just over 1,400 people. MPS employs over 8,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. So I find that just another irony that we don't look at the true value of what we're putting our tax dollars into. And then just one personal item, as a teacher for over 28 years, the end result of budget cuts every time is always the same. It never changes. And it's classroom sizes increase, retention of staff diminishes, and burnout is the eventual result of that. It's always the same. And from a personal perspective, I had the opportunity to meet a 26-year-old adult that turned out to be a former student of mine last week. We had a quick little reunion. She gave me a big hug, and then she reminded me, I always remember you defended us. She goes, don't forget to keep doing that because we know what's going on out there. So it's not like people are quiet or ignorant of what's going on. That's why I take a very strong stand with this. I know the difference of what occurs in our districts. It does take money. There's no way around that. No one's going to work for free. Classroom sizes are not going to make a major difference on how we are effective with our students. And keeping our staff is also a significant factor, especially in this profession. So anyway, again, Chris, thank you, and thank you for hearing me out.
Director Gokul Gandhi.
Director Leonard, to respond to the, a larger irony is that the same schools that are going to the state to ask for an increase in funding are schools in our community that also are able to provide $100 million worth of private funds to flow to their school system. So it's very unserious to me. And, you know, the second thing is the most newsworthy thing about tonight is that our students are lacking almost $4,000 in per pupil spending. Could you imagine as a family if you woke up one day and you said, I have a $4,000 gap in my household budget? Like, that just wouldn't work. And so if we really want to highlight what is happening here today on this stage and the discussion we're having, it's that our kids are lacking $4,000 worth of resources, not other things that are being imposed upon us by people that we did not ask for them to impose upon.
Director O'Halloran.
Thank you, Director, President Herndon, and thank you, Director Gokul Gandhi. Just to piggyback on that, it's not just our students that are currently suffering under this condition. I'm also getting messages from educators who are just wondering, what does this mean for me and my position? I was the last one hired. Am I going to be gone? You know, this is talking about our students, it's also talking about our staff, and it's talking about our staff's family, because if this educator doesn't have a job next year, then, you know, how is she going to provide for her family? And so, you know, the data is very important to focus on, but all of these data points represent people and their lives. And I think it's really important to remember that we're not talking about abstract figures, we're talking about actual people. And so I just worry that sometimes those get lost in these discussions of large numbers. Every data point represents a person who is probably kind of stressed right now. So,
Is there anyone else? Madam Secretary, I'd like to pass the gavel to our Vice President.
So noted.
Director President Herndon, do you have some comments? I assumed you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to speak the figure that I haven't heard tonight, which is the surplus amount that the state has exactly been sitting on in spite of defunding public schools statewide. That figure is over 8 billion. Am I correct? It was over 8 billion point whatever. Now, they've spent some of that at this point, but whatever they spent, it didn't come this way. Is that another correct assumption?
Mr. Thiel, can you clarify?
President Herndon, thank you. Yes, as we've been monitoring that state surplus situation, I think there are two numbers that we focus on. There has been some spending that's occurred since the end of the budget season, and you may have seen some of the spending for the university system, and some projections have changed a bit. But there continues to be over $1.8 billion in the quote-unquote rainy day fund at the state level. And I do not at the moment have the exact figure of the surplus balance, but I think when you put those two figures together, we are in the neighborhood of what essentially is a $6 billion amount at this point. That, to your point, is not going to public education, even though we're breaking the record for a number of school districts considering referendum.
President Herndon.
Yes, that's exactly what I was getting at, and our listeners and people that are watching should not forget that either, that our taxes, and especially in Milwaukee's case, and the others as well, education is funded for a good portion of it from your property taxes. And then the fact that the state is sitting on their responsibilities by policy to our public schools is totally criminal. It's real negligence, and this is on purpose, and they're still sitting on enough money to support the public schools throughout the state. And they said to pretty much everybody, if you need more funds, go to referendum. So, you know, it's shameful because over the last several years when we received additional funding from the referendum and from the ESSER funding with COVID, we did tremendous things for our students. And our students are really, really happy. And we were able to hire additional staff. Not meeting the full needs 100%, which we'd love to do that, but the difference has been drastic. Even when it comes to our buildings and our kitchens, and when I first got on the board, the kids were really complaining about the food service, and it turned out that many kitchens were lacking appropriate equipment. We've been systematically taking care of that, and you'll probably hear a report about that later tonight. And the successes that we've achieved in spite of our state legislators has been tremendous, and thank everybody for what they've done. And thank you for what I hope we all do for our future. Thank you. I'll take it back.
Gavel passed.
Thank you very much. If there are no more comments, Madam Secretary, are there any more reports or communications from the Office of Accountability at this point?
The Office of Accountability and Efficiency has two communications. The first is action on a request to retire to closed session to confer with legal counsel relative to litigation in which the board is or is likely to become involved. The recommendation is that the board retire to closed session for consideration of this item.
This item will be deferred to the end of the meeting. Madam Secretary, what is the next communication?
The next communication is the monthly report with possible action on activities within the Office of Accountability and Efficiency. This is an informational item. Although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required. Mr. Chasen has submitted that report. It's attached to the agenda.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move to the next item of business.
The next item of business is the reports of the independent hearing officers of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors. Student expulsions.
The chair will entertain a motion to accept, modify, or reject the reports of the independent hearing officers of the dates and times listed in our agenda. Will the secretary please call the roll? Director O'Halloran.
I move that we approve the reports of the independent hearing officers as attached.
Will the secretary please call the roll?
Madam Chair, that motion requires a second.
Second, please, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Second.
On the motion by Director O'Halloran to approve the reports of the independent hearing officers, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes. The motion passes.
We will now have the reports of the standing committees. Since public hearings was given at the committee meetings, the board, as is customary, will not be given public hearing on these reports this evening. Madam Secretary, what is the first report?
The first report is that of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel. Item 2, action on recommended administrative appointments, promotions, reassignments and reclassifications, salary increases and decreases, and limited term employment contracts exceeding 60 days has been set aside at the request of the administration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside? Director Leonard.
Would like to set aside item number 11.
Okay. Madam Secretary, what is the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Parent and Community Engagement. No items of this report have been set aside for separate consideration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside? Madam Secretary, what is the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Student Achievement and School Innovation. No items of this report have been set aside for separate consideration.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside? Madam Secretary, what is the next report?
The next report is that of the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies. No items of this report have been set aside.
Do any board members wish any items to be set aside? Okay. May I please have a motion on the balance of the committee's reports? Director Simpson,
I move that we accept the balance of the committee's reports.
a second. Director O'Halloran.
Second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On the motion by Director Simpson to approve the balance of the committee's reports, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, the motion passes.
Madam Secretary, what is the first item set aside?
The first item set aside is item 2 from the report of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel. Action on recommended administrative appointments, promotions, reassignments, and reclassifications, salary increases and decreases, limited term employment contracts exceeding 60 days. This item has been set aside at the request of the administration.
Will the administration please provide your comments?
President Herndon, members of the committee, Adrian Maddaleni, Chief Human Resources Officer, just wanted to bring to your attention that we added additional name at the last minute. We feel it's important to get everyone in as soon as possible instead of waiting for the last minute. So the Office of Board Governance had a position to add in that we're bringing forward for approval.
Thank you. Do board members have questions? What is the pleasure of the board with respect to this item? Director Simpson?
I move approval of the promotions, appointments, reclassifications, and limited term employment contracts as listed in the amended version.
Second. Director Gokul Gandhi?
Second.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On the motion by Director Simpson to approve the administration's recommendation inclusive of the revised appointment list, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, the motion passes.
Director O'Halloran.
If you're here and you are getting a new job or a promotion, would you please stand so we can applaud you? Congratulations. Thank you for bringing your talent to serve the students and community at MPS. Go forth and do great things.
Thank you. Madam Secretary?
We have one more item that was set aside, Madam President, that is also from the report of the Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel. Item 11, action on a request to approve the long-term capital improvement plan and waive administrative policy 3.09, parent 9, parent E, and authorize an agreement with PFM Asset Management LLC for the investment of the long-term capital improvement trust fund. Your committee recommended that the board approve the long-term capital improvement plan, waive Administrative Policy 3.09, Parent 9, Parent E, and authorize the agreement with PFM Asset Management for the investment of the Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust Fund. This item has been set aside by Director Leonard.
Okay, Director Leonard.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with having passed this. I just need some clarity on a couple of questions, and I'm hoping I can get through this the correct way. Look forward to some correction as we go through this, but mainly I'm looking at, one is, out of curiosity, what are the eligible expenses under the Capital Long-Term Trust? What defines that?
Administration.
President Herndon, Director Leonard, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance. The areas that the construction trust could be utilized is going to kind of follow the same framework that we use for the construction 210 tax levy, that, it's a certain dollar amount each year. And it's based on, we have some Business Plus projects, and just looking at some, as part of the 10-year projection that we do is like environmental compliance, that could be doing some potential asbestos cleanup of certain sorts. ADA upgrades, that's another Business Plus project, security projects, it was even some of the stuff that we just discussed today with the delegation that Dr. Posey mentioned about vehicle replacement. That has to do with upgrades and whatnot to the fleet, plows, trucks, vans, et cetera. Another major one is the major maintenance, deferred maintenance, the MM2. That's the ones that we take a look at the deferred maintenance list. Could be roofs, windows, parking lots, heating plants, et cetera. Those are things that we kind of look at the preservation of capacity. The other ones that are related to expansion of capacity is regional development plans, which would kind of focus on with the long-range facilities master plan. The major remodeling projects would be additions, renovations, projects of those sorts. And that would be the main focus, but I do know that we do have on here as well as some of the cost overrun related to the ESSER projects.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up?
Not on that, but thank you very much. I guess I'm trying to get to the sort of the timeline that we are going to be getting some kind of information. I know that we're going to be talked about, that you're going to come to us back in March with some information. I also remember Dr. Posley answering this question from me last week, mentioning the fact that there was also going to be information coming out in October. I'm just looking for clarity on those timelines and exactly what we're looking for, just so I understand what we need before that time. I guess would be the best way to say it.
Madam Chair and members of the board, I will start off and then turn it over to Sean Kane. One of the things that we're looking at is the facilities master plan, and we talked about bringing that back in October. And one of the reasons why we want to take a look at the facilities master plan, because we want some information around buildings as a facilities index piece that they give us on the buildings, and we don't want to put dollars into a building that we might decide to do something else with. So therefore, we want to have that to guide the work that we're going to be doing. But Sean can elaborate on some of the projects that we know that could take place right away.
Thank you, Dr. Posley, President Herndon, Director Leonard, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities and Maintenance. And with the long-range facilities master plan that Dr. Posley is referring to, we are planning on bringing that contract to the March board. I was participating on the evaluation committee this week. We conducted interviews with some of the people that submitted proposals. We feel very great of what some of the teams comprised of, that their experience, et cetera. And then we'll call them some of the tools in the toolbox that we do have. We do have the space utilization study program that we'll be working with this potential contractor to utilize. And then, we have the long-range facilities master plan from 2018 that had a lot of good data from walkthroughs of looking at what we constructed for buildings. To be quite honest, it's not like we recently constructed a lot of science room upgrades, art room upgrades. So we feel we have a lot of information that's going to be very helpful. But again, I think the space utilization study program is going to be very good. The nice thing is we have the strategic plan committee meetings that we have with stakeholders and department leaders, that we already have engaging conversations, that we think that's going to be some great conversations that we could have with the potential awarded contractor. So it is a very aggressive schedule of getting it done in October, but we already have a lot of things in place that is going to help streamline things. And as Dr. Posey indicated, in October, we do see that we have funding, that's potentially could be available. And again, we do have a long list of deferred maintenance projects that we looked at. It was probably hovering around $320 million. The nice thing that we did get with the ESSER projects, addressing like air quality, mechanical projects, some boilers, et cetera, we probably shaved off about 35 million off that list, which is very helpful. And, those are the things that we're looking at long term, that you want to make some very wise decisions with some of the facilities that we have. And I think the long-range facilities master plan is really going to be a good guide, and we'll probably get some great recommendations from this contractor.
So we can expect, I'm looking at a plan, and I know that we've gone back and forth on trying to figure out just how detailed this plan can be. Actually, I'm asking for your clarity on that, because the more I look at it, the more I don't see that as being as easy as just saying we're going to have a detailed prioritized plan. Give me your perspective on it, and that'll be my last question.
President Herndon, Director Leonard, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director, Facilities Maintenance Services. The one thing that we didn't have, I'll say, in 2018 is that we did get a great assessment from the contractor walking through, really taking a look at the condition of our buildings. We do know their averaging age about 80 years old. They took a look of how conducive the education environment was. Is there an adequate art room, adequate science program room, et cetera. So the nice thing is we have a lot of that data, but again, I don't see that changing much, but they'll follow and make a confirmation on certain things. But again, we also didn't have that space utilization study that was done at that time. So I think that is going to be, it's going to help push us a lot further along than where we're at. And again, looking at the deferred maintenance list, that we do have a very comprehensive evaluation how we looked at that. So compared to 2018, we have a lot more information and data ready and available, but also too, what I mentioned with the interaction between the departments, there's a lot of contacts or department leads that have been engaging in these type of conversations as we're looking at making big decisions when talking about right sizing the district. So if we didn't have all those tools in place, yeah, it would take a lot longer. We did have one of the consultant teams, we explained that to everybody, that it's an aggressive schedule. We had one that submitted a proposal, but they wanted a whole nother year, and we're like, we can't do that. So the ones that we do have, they understand it's a 6-month turnaround. They have resources and firms across the country, some had across the globe, so they felt very confident if they need to reallocate things. And a lot of these firms that are working with us have some early long-range facility master plan projects in the process. So again, these were very experienced people. We feel very confident that, once we get them on board, is it going to be easy? No. 6 months is aggressive, but we understand what we're up against, because we do have to make decisions at that time, especially if it's going to impact, the following school year.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Thank
Oops,
you,
sorry.
President Herndon, members of the board, Martha Kreitzman, Chief Financial Officer. I want to remind everyone that anytime Sean wants to move ahead with these funds as far as procuring anything or going into a contract, he has to bring that to the board, and then it would be clear that it's coming from the Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust.
Thank you. Do any more board members have questions? Director O'Halloran?
Thank you, since we're asking questions. So for example, if we were to say for the 2024-2025, we've earmarked, according to this plan, $7 million for deferred maintenance. Will there be a comprehensive, this is how the $7 million is going to get spent, or is it just going to come through AFP, like maybe $500,000 here, $1 million there? Just if somebody were interested specifically in understanding how this money were going to be spent, do they have to piece together the clues, or is there a report at the year end that we would expect?
Administration.
President Herndon, Director O'Halloran, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director of Facilities Maintenance Services. We do have a deferred maintenance list that, we do share with Mr. Chasen that kind of does a ranking of sorts. So the $7 million, we would definitely take a look at where we got the list right now. If I mentioned we're at about 320, if we shaved off 30 million, we're at 290, we kind of take a look at the top priorities. We typically have safety and compliance issues that we do have to definitely address. Like last year, we had fire escape projects. From a structural standpoint, we needed to address those. So last year, out of, I believe we had $5.2 million, $3 million of that addressed compliance issues out of that. Fire alarm testing, fire escapes, silver coating roofs, providing guards on radiators. Those are the important safety things that we have to do. So whenever we look at something like that, when I just recently looked at our projection for this year, I think we're hovering around 1.5, 1.6 of those type of things. But the next thing is for instance, we brought up at the AFP meeting, the Pulaski roof. Right now, that originally only had 40% done. We're doing another 40% chunk. That's $2.3 million. I'd like to get the last 20% done to get the roof done. It just makes sense. So those are the type of things that we look at those type of projects as we go down the priority list. And it could vary from something of a roof, a heating plant, the important things, certain those things. So yeah, if we had to report something back, that's not a problem. But that's kind of how the criteria that we established going down.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
It would be nice at some point just to have a comprehensive list of these are the projects that got funded with this $7 million. And I don't need to see it. I'm not expecting that you would know exactly how that $7 million gets spent, but I think it would be of interest to board members and possibly the public as well, just to see, here's your dollars at work. Here's how we're trying to make these buildings more, worthy of our wonderful students and staff. So I would be fine with a retroactive, like after the dollars are spent report. I don't think I need to have the plan and approve it beforehand, but it would just be nice to know afterwards on an annual basis.
President Herndon, Director O'Halloran, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities Maintenance Services. I guess the other thing that I should bring to light is that anytime we have a fire, a flood, an unexpected emergency, it's not as if there's the MPS tree in the backyard that, we pluck dollars from it. Part of the fund too comes to that, and we try to always allocate and put an allowance anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, because if we get break-ins, et cetera, those type of things are impacted with the unknowns.
Thank you. Okay, what is Director Jackson, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so my only question is there a percentage of historically underutilized business that partake in this, these contractors that are part of the process, I should say?
Administration.
President Herndon, Director Jackson, members of the board, Sean Kane, Senior Director for Facilities Maintenance Services. Yes, we work closely with contract compliance services. For instance, with the ESSER projects, they had a 25% assignment on those. So it kind of depends on the scale of the project, availability of contractors and the time of year with the bidding environment. But yes, there's always some type of assignment, not only for hub, coin, and student.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
No.
Okay, thank you. What is the pleasure of the board with respect to this item? Director O'Halloran.
I move that we approve, or we accept the recommendation of the committee, right? Sorry, I'm looking to the secretary for some guidance here, but this was approved at the committee level, so I move that we accept the committee's recommendation with regards to the long-term capital improvement plan.
Director Gokul Gandhi.
Second.
Okay. Madam Secretary, we have a second, so please call the roll.
On the motion by Director O'Halloran to approve the committee's recommendations relative to this item, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, the motion passes.
Madam Secretary, are there any items of regular business?
Yes, Madam President, we have 2 items of regular business. The first item is the reports of the board's delegates.
Would any of the delegates like to make any remarks? Director Leonard.
So, so the DAC, just so you know, and that report's before you and all, but tomorrow a busload of them will be going to Madison to press their case as a day of action regarding the referendum and our budget. So wish us best. I will be there with them. I'll be meeting Mr. Thiel there, and whoever else wants to go, you are more than welcome.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, what is the next report?
Before moving to the next report, I would just state for the record that the board's delegates to the Head Start Policy Council, to CISA number 1, and to WASB are also attached to your agenda.
Thank you.
The next report is the report of the President of the Milwaukee Board of School Directors.
You have that report on the portal and the minutes, and if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Madam Secretary, what is the next report?
There are no more reports, Madam President. We would be on to the items of unfinished business. We have one item of unfinished business, that is action on adoption of proposed revisions to Board Rule 2.06, Committee on Accountability, Finance, and Personnel, Powers and Duties. This is the item that had to be held over from the January 25th meeting. The board's rules require that proposed revisions to the board's rules be held one cycle for adoption, so this is just to tighten up that technicality of the board's rules. The recommendation is that the board approve the proposed revisions to Board Rule 2.06, consistent with the action taken on January 25th, 2024.
What is the pleasure of the board with respect to this item? Director Zombor.
I move approval of the proposed revisions to Board Rule 2.06 in the red line version attached.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a second. Would the secretary please call the roll?
On Director Zomber's motion to approve the proposed revisions to Board Rule 2.06 as shown in the attachment to the item. On that motion, Director Gokul-Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, are there any items of new business for referral to committee?
Madam President, there are no items of new business.
Okay, Madam Secretary, are there any resolutions?
Madam President, we have no resolutions for referral. We have no communications for referral.
Madam Secretary, what is the next item on our agenda?
Madam President, we're now back to the items that were previously deferred. Those are a communication from the Office of Board Governance on consideration of and possible action regarding the upcoming vacancy in the position of Board Clerk, Chief Officer, Office of Board Governance, and the communication from the Office of Accountability and Efficiency on a request to retire to closed session to confer with legal counsel relative to litigation in which the board is or is likely to become involved.
Director Gokul-Gandhi.
I'm sorry, members, Madam President, you need to read that.
Yeah, I was going to read it. Okay. At this time, I will accept a motion to retire to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85(1)(c) to consider the employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the board has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85(1)(g), to confer with legal counsel for the board who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the board with respect to litigation in which the board is or is likely to become involved. May I have that motion now, Director Gokul-Gandhi?
I move that we retire to closed session.
Second, please. Director O'Halloran.
A second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On the motion by Director Gokul-Gandhi to retire to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C, and Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent G. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Zombor.
Aye.
And President Herndon.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, the motion passes.
The board will now retire to closed session. The board may return to open session to take action on matters discussed in closed session. Otherwise, the board will adjourn from closed session. Madam Secretary, please note the time.
So noted.